Welcome to this week's episode of Insights. During this week's show, we're going to cover three items. The first one's going to be the launch of Armenia's first domestically made satellite. Then we're going to review Armenia's vulnerabilities to economic warfare by the Russian state. And lastly, we're going to close with a few comments about the death of former American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. Let's start off with the first topic of the week, which was the launch of Armenia's first domestically produced satellite called Hayasat-1. This follows up a satellite that we sent to space last year, which was actually produced by a Spanish company. This is the first domestically produced one. This has actually rather modest uses, but it's obviously a great first step. It is showing a greater and growing technical and technological capability, especially in our private sector. And obviously, the logic of this eventually will lead to what we actually need the most, which is military satellites. But this is something that will take multiple steps to get there. This is all for the good. However, I think we need to step back and examine this because we're having a growing science scene in Armenia, but it tends to be in the private sector. It tends to be in pockets. And what's missing is sort of a greater state policy and metrics as far as what kind of science we want, and what is it that you want that science to focus on. But overall, this is in a bleak year with a lot of bad news. This is a small but very good news, and it's something for us to celebrate and be proud of. Let's move on to the second topic of the week, and which is this country's economic vulnerabilities to Russia. And why do you want to talk about this? For more than a week now, our trucks exporting our products from Armenia to Russia have been blocked at the Russian-Georgian border by the Russian state. This is obviously a form of economic warfare against Armenia for its clear but slow pivot to the West. So what we want to do is we want to go through different sectors of what our vulnerabilities are and what the possibilities are to deal with them or what the greatest dangers are. We start off with the number one vulnerability, which is agricultural exports. And I think this is the reason that they've actually started with blocking the road, because this is our greatest vulnerabilities, because these are perishable goods, and it actually affect the large number of people in Armenia that actually make a living off of exporting, whether it's roses and strawberries or half a dozen different things to Russia. So that's clearly obvious why they start here, because it creates the greatest vulnerabilities. The problem is that it's not very easy to move that export market from Russia to other places, especially to the European Union, because the European Union has its very strict certification policies, which is going to take months or years for different companies to pass. So there are not immediate other markets that you can actually start exporting to. But any way you look at it, that is a process that needs to start, because the Russian market, frankly, is not reliable as a long-term market for our products. The second part of the economic warfare that they can engage against us is to send back labor migrants. There's still many Armenians, mostly men, that go to Armenia to work and send money to their families. There's entire villages who do that, actually, depending on what part of the country they're from. This is a double-edged sword, because at the same time, Russia actually needs labor, especially because of the war that it's waging in Ukraine. So sending all of these people back is not going to be that easy. And secondly, many of these people actually have Russian citizenships, and some of them should have families in Russia. So it is something that is much easier said than done. And actually, if they send back laborers to Armenia, we have a labor shortage. So this is something that it's actually going to sting less than the issue of agricultural exports if they decide to go there. Let's move on to the third topic, which is energy, in this case, gas exports. We get about 70% of our gas from Russia. There is an actual alternative possibility from Iran, because the gas pipeline from Iran actually is large enough to handle all of our capacity if all of Russian gas capacity is cut down. But there's actually issues with Iranian gas, because in the winters they actually have a hard time supplying some of their northern provinces. Overall, the country is awash with gas, but it will need some adjustments for them to take over entirety of our gas needs if it needs to go there. The other thing is the matter of price. We pay some of the lowest prices for gas on a wholesale level, but frankly, by the time that gets to the consumer, we're paying world prices because of whatever Gazprom takes in Armenia itself. They could easily come back and raise those gas prices or cut them off for whatever reason. I think this is the least likely place for them to go, because for them to cut off gas would be the nuclear option, and it will be something that will be responded to in significant ways on the economic front by this country. So I don't think they're going to go here, but it is something that we need to prepare for. The fourth point of vulnerability is the nuclear plant. The Metsamor nuclear plant right now, depending on time of the year, produces about 30%, in certain cases more, of our electricity in Armenia. And one thing that the Russian state can do is essentially refuse to sell us fuel for it. This is actually, the nuclear front is the one part where actually Russia has a dominant position in the nuclear energy, because while other countries are walking away from that industry, the Russians doubled down on it about 15, 20 years ago. In fact, many U.S. plants actually get Russian fuel, and it's actually Russian nuclear industry, and specifically Russian nuclear fuel, is actually the one thing that is not sanctioned out of Russia that everybody can buy. So this is something that could be quite problematic because they are the main players in this. And then moving forward, we're going to have to very soon choose a new nuclear plant that's going to be replacing Metsamor in about 10 years. And the reality is that's not likely to be a Russian one. Most likely we're going to choose between a South Korean or U.S. models for many different reasons, partly because the Russian ones are really hard to build because of related sanctions that aren't directly related to nuclear power, but will affect the building of anything Russian anywhere. Now let's step back and look at the politics of this. It is said that the best sign of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If the Russian state decides to go down this path, it will not make this country more pro-Russian, or even this government more pro-Russian. It will most likely simply accelerate the Western pivot and will pretty much unify this country against the Russian state, even more so than it is right now. However, having said all of that, I think it's important for us to approach this with caution. These are dramatic changes that can have effects on people's daily lives. Yes, we need to transition away from Russia as much as possible, but it needs to be done as smoothly as possible and avoiding cheap provocations when unnecessary. However, if this is pushed to its logical conclusion, i.e. Russia wants to continue waging full-scale economic warfare, I think the discussions of exiting the EU will become very common. For people who don't know, EU is the Eurasian Economic Union. And I can go ahead and give a long technical explanation of what it is, but for the most part, it's sort of the European Union for idiots. And it was a union that we were forced to join in 2014 by the Russians when we were on track to join the European Union, which would have been far more beneficial to this country. The reality is that economic war waged by Russia against us will hurt us on the short run. Anybody who says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about. But we are not without alternatives, and if we're pushed to the corner, we will go to those. One of the issues with Russian economic warfare against Armenia is because the former regime, especially, gave away so much to Russia. They actually have tremendous infrastructures here that, if need be, whether it's mines, whether it's distribution centers, whether it's the nuclear plant, that you can actually start nationalizing if they want to go on a full-scale war against this country on the economic front. Now we're going to move on to the third topic of the week, which is the death of former American Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, who passed away this week at the age of 100, again proving the old adage that only the good die young. It is estimated that Mr. Kissinger is responsible for the death of 2 or 3 million people, stretching from Vietnam to Cambodia to Argentina and Chile. One of his primary ideas, supposedly, was this concept of realpolitik, which was the cynical view of politics. It's all about state interests and human rights and other things don't matter. Now, frankly, there's nothing innovative about this because 90% of all politics is realpolitik. In the case of Mr. Kissinger, it was simply an excuse for criminality. Now you might ask, how does this man's death relate to Armenia? And I'll tell you exactly how it relates to Armenia. In this case, when we look at Artsakh, one of the biggest obstacles to preventing ethnic cleansing in Artsakh was actually the United States State Department that worked actively to block any UN Security Council resolutions or any international actions in preventing ethnic cleansing. In conclusion, the United States State Department was actually full of the direct and moral errors of Mr. Kissinger and his way of thinking. And in their mind, having a people who have lived on the land for 2,000 years to be ethnically cleansed off their land is actually a form of solving an international problem. Thank you for joining me in this week's episode of Insights.